For 40 straight days, the entire army of Israel stood frozen in a valley, too terrified to move. Not one soldier. Not even the king. Because standing across the ravine was a man over 9 feet tall, daring anyone to fight him, and nobody would. Then a teenager who wasn't even supposed to be there said yes. Most people already know how this story ends. A boy, a sling, 1 stone, a giant falls. But the real story is far stranger than the version taught in Sunday school, because the boy wasn't reckless. The stone wasn't luck, and the giant wasn't just big. He belonged to a bloodline the Bible had been trying to erase for centuries, and that single detail changes why God let this fight happen at all. Start at the beginning. Before there was a valley, there was a secret. Years earlier, the prophet Samuel had walked into Jesse's house in Bethlehem looking for Israel's next king. He looked at the oldest son, Eliab, tall and impressive, and assumed that was the one. God told him otherwise. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Samuel kept going down the line of brothers until there was only one left, the youngest, still out in the fields with the sheep. That was David. Samuel anointed him with oil right there, in front of his family, years before anyone outside that house knew his name. Nobody in the Valley of Elah remembers that morning. To the army, David is just Jesse's youngest son, the one who wasn't even considered old enough to fight. But David remembers. He has already been chosen. He just hasn't been tested yet. The year is around 1010 BC. The place is the Valley of Elah, a strip of land between Israelite and Philistine territory. King Saul leads Israel's army. He is tall, strong, and terrified, because standing across the valley is Goliath of Gath. Scripture measures him at 6 cubits and a span. That's roughly 9 feet 9 inches. Some ancient manuscripts, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, record a shorter height, closer to 6'9". Either way, he towers over every man in both camps. Here's the detail most retellings skip. Gath was one of 5 Philistine cities, and Gath, specifically, is linked in Scripture to the Anakim, a race of unusually large people mentioned back in the Book of Numbers, when Israelite spies scouted Canaan and came back terrified, saying they felt like grasshoppers next to them. Joshua later drove most of the Anakim out of the land, but a remnant survived in 3 cities. Gath was one of them. So Goliath isn't a random giant. He's a descendant of a bloodline Israel had been trying to eliminate for generations. His presence alone is a message. The old enemy never fully left. For 40 days, Goliath walks out every morning and every evening. He mocks Israel's God. He demands a champion. Nobody moves. Not Saul, who stands head and shoulders above the crowd. Not Abner, his general. Not one soldier in an army of thousands. Why? Because Goliath isn't just tall. Look at his gear. Bronze helmet. Bronze armor weighing about 125 pounds. Bronze greaves, a bronze javelin slung across his back. And a spear with an iron head weighing around 15 pounds, its shaft compared to a weaver's beam. He has a personal shield bearer walking in front of him. This isn't a wild barbarian. This is a walking siege weapon, armored like a tank, backed by an empire's worth of Bronze Age technology. Then there's David. He's not a soldier. He's the youngest of 8 sons, sent by his father Jesse to bring bread and cheese to his brothers on the front line and to check on their welfare. He's a shepherd. His job is protecting sheep from lions and bears, not fighting armies. And that job matters more than it sounds. David later tells Saul directly what that job actually involved. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, David went after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. When the animal turned on him, he caught it by its fur and killed it. That's not a children's story detail. That's a teenager who has already survived multiple close-range fights against apex predators, alone, with no one cheering him on and no one there to save him if he failed. But when David hears Goliath's challenge, he doesn't hear it the way everyone else does. He asks a simple question. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? That single sentence reveals everything about how David sees the world. Saul sees a giant. David sees a man who has insulted the covenant. To David, this was never really about size. It was about whose God was real. Saul finally calls for him, and here's where the story gets stranger, not simpler. Saul offers David his own armor, his bronze helmet, his coat of mail, his sword. Picture that moment. The king of Israel, arming a teenager with his personal war gear. It should have been the obvious solution. Instead, David puts it on, takes a few steps, and takes it all off again. Why refuse the best equipment in the entire Israelite camp? Because it wasn't tested. David says exactly that. He hasn't proven it. It isn't his. Wearing someone else's armor, someone else's method, someone else's faith would have gotten him killed. David needed to fight with what he actually knew. So he picks up his staff. He selects 5 smooth stones from the stream bed, and he carries his sling. Here's the detail almost every retelling flattens into a lucky shot with a slingshot. A sling, in the ancient world, was not a child's toy. It was a genuine battlefield weapon. Trained slingers in ancient armies, including later Israelite units mentioned in the Book of Judges, could hit a target the size of a coin from over 100 yards away. The stones themselves, when analyzed by modern ballistics experts, could travel at speeds comparable to a bullet from a modern handgun. David wasn't gambling. He was using the one weapon system he had mastered through years of defending sheep from predators in open country. Goliath sees a boy with a stick and laughs. He curses David by his gods and promises to feed his flesh to birds and animals. David's answer is the turning point of the entire account. He says Goliath comes with sword and spear and javelin, but David comes in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel whom Goliath has defied. And then he says something even bolder, that the whole world will know there is a God in Israel, not just the armies watching, the whole world. This was never framed as one boy's personal courage. It was framed as a public demonstration, on a stage 9 feet tall, of whose power actually governs history. Goliath advances. David runs toward him, not away. He slings 1 stone. It strikes Goliath in the forehead, in the one place his armor didn't cover, and the giant falls face down on the ground. David didn't even carry a sword of his own, so he takes Goliath's blade from its sheath and finishes what the stone started. The Philistine army, watching their champion collapse, breaks and runs. Israel's forces chase them all the way to the gates of Ekron and Gath. Now for the twist almost nobody talks about. This isn't the last time Goliath's name appears in Scripture. In 2 Samuel chapter 21, decades later, another warrior named Elhanan is credited with killing a giant, also described as being from Gath, whose spear shaft is again compared to a weaver's beam. Many scholars believe this refers either to a brother of Goliath or to a variant textual tradition naming David directly, since 1 Chronicles 20 clarifies the victim as Goliath's brother. Either way, one detail stays consistent across every account. The giants of Gath kept appearing, and they kept being defeated by men who trusted preparation over size. That's the real reframe. This was never a single lucky underdog moment. It was evidence of a pattern woven through Israel's story, one where victory kept belonging not to the biggest army or the tallest warrior, but to whoever actually trusted what they'd already been given. But the valley wasn't the end of the story either. It was only the beginning of a much harder one. When the army returned from the slaughter, the women came out of the towns singing and dancing, celebrating with a song that would follow David for the rest of his life. Saul has slain his thousands, they sang, and David his 10,000s. Saul heard it, and something in him broke. Scripture says the king eyed David with suspicion from that day forward. The same battlefield victory that saved Israel also planted the seed of a jealousy that would eventually send David running for his life into caves and wilderness for years. There's one more relationship born that same day, easy to miss in the drama of the fight itself. Saul's own son, Jonathan, the crown prince, the man with every reason to see David as a threat to his future throne, instead makes a covenant with him. He strips off his own robe, his armor, his sword, his bow, his belt, and gives them to David. It's a strange mirror of Saul's earlier offer. Saul's armor didn't fit David before the fight. Jonathan's loyalty fits him perfectly after it. David didn't win because God overrode reality and made a stone magically deadly. David won because he refused to fight somebody else's battle with somebody else's tools. He used a skill built through years of unglamorous, unnoticed work in empty fields, protecting animals nobody was watching him protect. Saul had an army. Saul had armor. Saul had size. What Saul didn't have in that moment was trust built through obscurity, through years of showing up for a job no one applauded. That's the part worth carrying out of this story. Not the giant, not the stone. The years before anyone was watching, when a shepherd kept choosing to trust the one weapon he'd already proven, instead of borrowing someone else's armor. David's story isn't really about defeating a giant. It's about the years before the giant ever showed up. The stones he'd already practiced with 1,000 times, alone, where nobody was watching. The sling he'd already trusted with a lion and a bear, long before he ever trusted it with a 9-foot warrior wrapped in bronze. For 40 days, an entire army stood frozen, waiting for someone else to be brave first. It only took one person who had already decided, long before that valley, to say yes. That's the real ending of this story. It was never really a battle between a boy and a giant. It was a demonstration of who someone becomes in all the small, unseen moments before the moment anyone is watching.